In the Department of Logistics and Resource Operations, we're trying to get our arms around the idea of design thinking and how it connects to what we are calling our regular or default thinking processes and critical thinking and instinctual responses along something like a continuum. And the first thing that came to our mind was this idea that if we look at the bottom dimension here of time, as time decreases, we say that the role of the commander is going to increase in terms of making a critical decision. We could see that something where there is very little time left before we have to have a decision, the role of the commander is highly emphasized. And we think of that as a critical decision because now we are relying on his instinctive or his habitual or his intuitive or his experience-based decision in a short period of time. He's got to be very directive. There simply isn't enough time for him to issue initial planning guidance to a staff who can go through a rational choice process like the military decision-making process and then develop distinct courses of action that we can evaluate and select based on defined criteria and analysis. That's all very scientific, all very engineering. The other element that we were looking at was that as you have more time available, and possibly as complexity increases, the need for critical thinking becomes even more apparent. And so the commander's staff now takes up a greater role in being able to provide him the benefit of multi points of view, multiple perspectives, and bring in some other considerations that may be beyond his scope of understanding or beyond his experience or beyond the time that he has available to develop it individually. So we think that can be where this connection between thinking and design thinking occurs. And we think critical thinking goes even beyond the working definitions of design thinking to include much more diverse perspectives from many different thinking and feeling disciplines. So we think as a function of time then, as the role of the commander decreases, the role of the staff increases. That would be their position above the line. And we are reflecting that in this sense here, that the staff's role increases as time becomes more available and as the need for more critical thinking is enforced. I should say that this instinctual response is just a placeholder right now. We think that could include things like Klein's recognition-primed decision-making. It could be instincts that have been formally trained through battle drill and overtraining so that we can instinctively respond to environmental cues like react to sniper or developing a squad, platoon, company, battalion, brigade battle drill in which we have some reliable behaviors that don't require a formal MDMP, but we can simply just execute based on our training. But it could also include things that haven't been trained, things that we've inherited from our DNA or from our experience, or that it reside at a very deep level and bubble to the surface and come to our mind perhaps intuitively. Gladwell's ideas in his book Blink that describes how through thin slicing and overtraining we can actually take a formal process that requires cognition and train that to the instinctive level. And so there's a possibility, we think, of developing these responses either from environmental adaptation or from intentional training. But we're more concerned, I think, on this other end of the spectrum around design thinking and critical thinking. And so when we look at that, at the union of those two slides, we're thinking that somewhere in the middle there is probably this sweet spot that involves commander's involvement and his knowledge base and his experience base and his heuristics and his wisdom and his reflective practice, and that of the staff, which comes out of their formal staff estimates and their functional areas, but also includes their experience, their tools, their perspectives, their running estimate. And somewhere in the middle, when problems that are appropriate for thinking and design thinking are in place, that's probably the domain where the military decision-making process with some element of design thinking is most appropriate. We then started thinking that that led us to think about the idea that the nature of the situation or the problem set or the opportunity or the environment and the subsequent environmental frame, as described in the Sam's book, has something to do with where you are on that diagram. And we started noodling around some ideas about defined problems with low complexity, something like react to an ambush, is on the left-hand side, where we are comfortable with selecting an appropriate strategy to deal with those kinds of problems. In this case, react to ambushes, you execute the battle drill. In fact, you don't go through a thinking process or a design thinking process or a critical thinking process, because that'll get you killed. And so what you have to be able to do is react to environmental cues in an appropriate manner. And so I think there's a sense of a need for diagnosis, of knowing where you are, being able to rapidly estimate the situation and determine the nature of the emerging problem. Now, the problem with that general strategy is that there are plenty of problems that we thought are appropriate for MDMP and rational choice theory, in which turn out not to be the case at all, because there's more going on than our initial estimate. And we think that is probably what drives the need for design thinking and critical thinking and environmental framing and reframing, in order to ensure that our assumption that we have a certain type of a problem is in fact borne out by evidence, and that we are better off if we start bringing design thinking and critical thinking into play earlier, so that we don't have to wait for a series of failures to determine that what we thought was defined problems of high complexity really are in fact something else altogether, like one of the Horst and Riddle wicked messes, for example. And so this is this leads us to this kind of dynamic, this double loop or this iterative process where we have these inputs, which represent a lot of different things. The resources available, what we understand to be the environmental context, the paradigm that we bring to assessing our environment and our ongoing actions, our current state of emotions, our skills, the tacit knowledge, the cultural knowledge, the doctrine that we have on board, the commitment to the particular environment and its outcomes, how committed we are to that. Our values and beliefs are certainly in place. Environmental triggers that launch us into the next cycle of thinking and acting. Recognition of the implications of our outcomes and the consequences of our actions. And then the onboard processes, models, and methodologies that we bring to the table as part of our routine, the behaviors that we have available to us. And so then when a problem triggers us and we do some kind of diagnosis and determine what we think we have, and then choosing the appropriate strategy, and then action is taken, and we have some kind of output that could result in a decision to take action, to make a change, to engage, and then a feedback process from those results that informs our inputs. Now, what occurred to me when we drew this out on the board was just how deep this apparently simple feedback loop really becomes. Because I think that if you take this on in terms of an experiment or hypothesis for action, we're going to specify ahead of time what the things are that we're going to measure, our measures of performance and effectiveness. And so the form and the method and the interpretation and the scaling of feedback is related to our paradigm going in. And so the danger there is that if you operate from a particular paradigm and you're looking for only certain kinds of feedback, you may not be open to the other things that are really going on. And that's where that dimension of critical thinking can occur, to allow us to look not just at the formal and the explicit results, but as a way to take that apart and look at it from different angles and find deeper meanings and other meanings and competing narratives and incomplete stories and potentials that are in there that suggest a deeper and richer understanding of the environmental context, and which may give us insights into the nature of the problem that we thought we were solving, and gives us an alternative narrative to understand the feedback. And so I think there's a lot more that goes into this model in our understanding of what constitutes feedback. If you don't specify measures of performance and effectiveness, you fall prey to being caught up in the moment of the results and then creating sense out of the mental state that you're in at the moment of receiving the results. And so objectivists and positivists would say that's the nature of the scientific method, is to specify the things you're going to look for and how you're going to interpret them ahead of time and deriving that from paradigm. The breakdown of that model is that when you have ill-defined problems, or when the objectivist model is not really appropriate for the situation, you can get locked into a strict protocol for feedbacks that don't allow you to apply critical thinking. So we've got to find some way of constructing hypotheses and experiments and taking action and looking at results, but then bringing an additional element of critical thinking in there to question our own paradigms before we commit to a dominant narrative that makes sense out of the results that we got from our last action. And so we think that whole notion of how to construct plans and designs in such a way that they are information gathering activities is an important part of the critical thinking process. You've got to be able to operate inside the paradigm that we all share as members of a culture and a profession, but we have to bring elements of critical thinking in as well. We think the more we start exercising those muscles of critical thinking, the more likely we are to be able to have that available to us as part of our input for the next cycle. It becomes part of our paradigm, part of our tacit knowledge, a habit of mind of using critical thinking, of questioning the results that are easily derived, or that the dominant narrative that emerges, being able to question that routinely and reliably and consistently and systematically and intuitively and artistically. We think that becomes an important part of our critical thinking curriculum, so that we start making that a normal way of thinking and not something that we do only after all of the other approaches have failed. So that's where we are right now, and my feelings about this particular model, this particular exercise we went through, and these are the things that are on my mind. This is Ken Long from the the Department of Logistics and Resource Operations at Command and General Staff College, December 15th, 2010.